Hi, this is Jeff Marsacci, the Plain English Attorney, and welcome to this webinar slash live stream that we're going to be putting up. It's going to end up going out as a regular video, maybe in pieces, but also as a webinar. And I'm also doing this as an instructional thing for other attorneys and financial advisors and accountants in a professional setting. So we're going to try to make this video count for all three. And it's what happens if Obergefell falls. And you might already have seen something happen, and this is just up now. And well, great, I predicted it. Well, what is Obergefell? Well, Obergefell is a Supreme Court decision that instituted the right to marriage for same sex partners. And it shouldn't be that big of a stretch for, look, the 14th Amendment says, look, if you're a citizen, you get all of the rights and privileges of all the other citizens. You don't get to say, well, these citizens get this and these citizens get that. And we don't like these people, so they don't get to have the same rights as everybody else. And basically, what it was saying is like, look, if the states or the federal government are going to give out these special privileges, tax breaks, and automatic inheritance, and all this other stuff, then it's got to be for any two adults. You don't get to say, well, it's only between a man and a woman. And so that just leveled a whole bunch of state laws that outlawed gay marriage. So we now have more than 10 years, well, about 10 years, yeah, 10 years later, we now have a new administration and a very hostile Supreme Court to national rights. We'll just let the states decide. We're going to throw out all this precedence. We're going to throw out all of these rights that people have enjoyed for decades in some cases. And we're just going to go ahead and let the states decide. And so now the states are going to end up eliminating a lot of marriage equality rights. It looks like that's exactly where it's going. Now, one big question is it going to be, we're going to nullify the marriages that have already taken place and just ban new ones, or are all of them void if the state law said they would have been void and not legal? So what can we do? And it's been more than a decade. I don't know the exact number, but I actually had a lot of clients that were same sex partners. They wanted to be able to reach their goals. They wanted to protect each other, bring everything together as one family unit. They really wanted to have these rights of marriage, but they weren't allowed to under the law. And so I started looking at all of the different estate planning things that can be done and work that in and come up with a plan that's going to, well, all right, this is going to get you 90% of the way there. That just kind of went into mothballs when the marriage equality laws came, the ruling came down, and now suddenly partners could get married, and okay, they got all of that. Now, the way I've always looked at this is marriage as an estate plan is actually, if you've got the right to get married, then what you're really getting is the right to be lazy about your own planning. So, let me go a little bit into how I actually got involved in doing estate planning in the first place. And this is really going way, way back to when my grandfather died just a few weeks before I went away to law school. So he was a really big influence in my life. And him and my grandmother actually moved in with my family when my mother died when I was 9, almost 10. And they just kind of helped raise me and my sister for several years until my father got remarried. And so, look, when my grandmother called me on day 2 of law school, she started asking me all these questions because it turns out that part of her house had to go into probate for my grandfather. Well, okay, she didn't understand all of this mean. And she had an attorney, but every time she called to ask a question, she'd get a bill and she didn't got an answer she didn't understand. And so she, of course, being a proud grandmother, asked her grandson, "What's all this about? Can you explain it to me?" And I started running all over the law library because if you ask any first year law student a legal question, doesn't matter what the question is, the top answer is going to be, "I don't know. Let me look it up in the law library." So here I am running around getting questions, and I'm getting these questions, every week or two. And suddenly I notice it's a year and a half later, and this still isn't done. And my grandmother said something that really stuck with me. And she's like, "I really just don't feel right because I don't think my house is mine until the court, the government says so." So I wanted to help keep that feeling away from my clients and my clients' families as I started my own law practice. So it's the government interference with the process and slowing everything down. And now, when we talk about same sex partners potentially denying marriage rights, this is where we have to make sure we're doing everything correctly so that you can take advantage of as much as you can under the law. Can the Supreme Court just overthrow the marriage equality ruling? Probably. Uh, yeah, I'd say Obergefell is probably going to fall within the next 4 years. That's just my prediction, but I think it's a pretty solid one. So, what can we end up doing? Well, let's take a look at what government laws are. And I know this is going to tick off a whole bunch of attorneys and other people who teach the law because that's not the way it is. Well, yeah, it actually is if you look at it from the people's perspective, not from the teachers, not from the lawyers, not from the government people, because they'll say, well, there's constitutional law and there's statutory law at the federal level. No, 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 no. From the people's perspective, there's three levels of this law, three types of law. First, protection for citizens. So what laws in constitutional, what is in place to protect you? These are the laws that raise the military and fund it, that have police and other, first responders being paid for by the government, regulated by the government, food safety, import, export, keeping the economy going. These are just laws that protect you. Now, you can argue, oh, they do too much, or they do too little, or they do not enough here, but too much here. And look, all of that is semantics, but it's protection for citizens. Second level of law is managing disputes. So if there's a dispute between two people, here's the court setup and other types of solutions to resolve these disputes. If there's a dispute with a company, all this, so essentially this is kind of getting down to the courts and resolving disputes between people, not protecting the citizens. And the third, this is going to tick almost everybody off. I call them the irresponsibility laws. It's those laws that fill in the gaps when you don't make your own decisions and do the adult thing and put it in the right way. So if you don't have any estate plan, you didn't bother to put together a trust or even a last will and testament, well, the law fills in. Here's what happens with your stuff because you weren't responsible enough to actually go ahead and do it yourself. And when it comes to estate planning, unfortunately, this is where like 70% of the population does absolutely nothing. So these irresponsibility laws also represent the biggest opportunity to get exactly what you want. Are you really going to spend all of your free time in politics trying to overthrow and do get different people in office so that the laws end up being your way and you can now rely on the government to make these decisions for you? Or are you actually going to do what you need to do for your own plan first? I'm not saying the other thing isn't important. I'm not saying that equal rights isn't important. But what I'm saying is you need to take care of your own stuff first as an adult to make sure you get exactly what you want, or at least as much of it as you can, and not just say, well, okay, I'm vulnerable until the law changes. The fact is, you're not. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Look, marriage is the right to be lazy about these irresponsibility laws because the government is supposed to protect you. Okay, so let's now move into what I call five myths of partner planning because this is out there. I saw it way before, like I said, more than a decade ago. I saw some of these attitudes. It's like, oh, well, this is all we need to do. And it tended to be a lot more simple than actually sitting down with an attorney and planning things out. First, oh, I'm just going to adopt my partner. I could do an adult adoption, and that's going to give me everything that I want. No, it's not. No, it's not. First, adoption only goes one way. So that doesn't mean you're automatically making all these financial decisions because as two adults, if you just imagine a parent and a child, and the child is 25, the parent doesn't get to walk into a bank and say, well, I'm going to do this financial thing. It's my child. Well, they're a legal adult, but it's my child. No, it doesn't work. The other thing is if you really think this government at the federal level is going to be hostile to same sex partners, do you really think they're not going to try to prosecute you under incest laws if you do an adoption? It's not going to do anything you want it to do, and it's going to potentially have hugely negative consequences. Second one I've heard in the past is, oh, well, we can just register as domestic partners. Well, okay, some states had that system prior to marriage equality, and they may put it back in place, but just registering as domestic partners in another state isn't really going to do what you want it to do. And it's certainly not going to do anything if, well, we're registered as domestic partners with my employer so that those benefits can come into play for my partner. No, that's not going to work for everything else. Just because you're registered as domestic partners with a company doesn't mean you're now the power of attorney or you can kind of oversee finances for each other in a crisis or otherwise. Third thing, and this happened only because they thought it was the only thing that's available. We're just going to go get married in a marriage equality state, and then our state is going to have to recognize that. Well, no, they don't. They didn't before, and it's not going to happen again. So the reason why people were thinking, oh, if we get married in another state, all the other states have to recognize our marriage. Well, that wasn't happening, even though you have the full faith and credit recognition. So if you're a same sex partners, you want to get married in another state and go to a state that doesn't have marriage equality anymore because Obergefell fell, you're not going to get the same rights. However, if a state said you can get married legally at 14, then that state is still going to recognize it. It doesn't make sense. It's not consistent, but it's also not going to work for your purposes. Fourth thing, and now we're getting into some things that do have some kind of potential benefits, but not nearly as much as people think. Oh, we're just going to use pay on death designations on accounts or beneficiary designations, or we're going to try to own something joint with the right of survivorship, and that's going to solve all our problems. It's not. Again, this is typically looking for an easy solution to something that really deserves much more attention and detail. So these duct tape solutions, and even, okay, that might help a little bit, or, it might help a little bit with the inheritance aspect. might help a little bit with, okay, I can go into the bank because it's a joint account, but in the long run, it's really not going to do what you need it to do. And then the fifth thing, we'll just use a last will and testament, and therefore I'm going to be protecting my partner. Okay, again, it's getting into a court, and it's a court system that gets increasingly hostile towards same-sex partners and just the LGBTQ plus community in general. Do you really want to say, oh, well, yes, we'll do this will, and now this court is going to do exactly what we want it to? No. What you really want is something absolutely solid with multiple contingencies put together as a coordinated plan, not just duct tape, not just using a will. What you want is a full system that's going to be able to put in place and legally empower you. And the thing is, it needs to happen ahead of time. You don't get to just say, oh, well, here's a crisis. Let's put stuff together. Got to be more than 12 years ago. Somebody was calling us saying they wanted to do the whole planning. So again, prior to the marriage equality rulings, I think they were actually out in Greensboro, and yeah, this is my partner and I, we really need to put this all together, and we want to do this, but I need a power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney for my partner right away. I'm like, well, okay, what's going on? Oh, well, they're in a coma and the family's stepping in and they're taking control of everything. And I need this power of attorney and healthcare power of attorney. Oh, wait, you just said your partner's in a coma. Yeah. Well, they can't sign legal documents once they're in a coma. Well, what do you mean? So there was absolutely nothing that could be done. And unfortunately, in this case, we got a couple of calls back after this. It's like, okay, partner was in a coma. The family came in, took over the apartment they both shared, changed the locks, took control of all the finances, kicked him out of the hospital room because, hey, they were the next of kin. And that was it. End of story. So there was nothing in place. But in this crisis, there was nothing they could do because their partner was not legally competent to actually execute the plan. So just a cautionary way of saying, get your stuff done as soon as you can. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about the typical partner goals. And this is really where we're going to start getting into things. Most of the partners I've worked with over my decades of working with clients and the plan that I ended up developing was based around these goals. Actually, let me go ahead and tell the story of that. Um, I did my practice a little bit different than a lot of other attorneys. A lot of other attorneys, they went to a law firm. They worked there as an associate. They learned the way things were done and then they just kind of moved on. Well, all right. And they just followed that. For me, I had clients come to me with an issue. I hit the books, looked at strategies, and then tried to develop everything that I could to meet those clients' goals. That's really the way it should be, but that's not the way it happens. There's so much of, well, this is the way we've always done it, that you didn't get hardly any progress in creative solutions. And I just wasn't in that mindset. It's like, look, no, I want to get my clients as much as they possibly can based on what their goals were. So this is definitely more than 15 years ago. I was teaching at a national conference. It wasn't a huge number of attorneys that were in this, but what I talked about were three specific situations that aren't completely common, and here's some solutions. And so I talked about, okay, here's how you handle what if they have a child with special needs? How do you do the planning to make sure they don't lose their benefits? And everyone's like, yeah, okay, all right. And then there was another category like, well, how do you do it with stepchildren and combine things? So, yeah, okay. And then I start talking about same sex partners and how you do that planning that I had put together, and everybody's furiously writing, and they're like, I'm like, I'm looking around, I'm like, wait a minute, don't you guys already kind of know this? Isn't this something that you've already been exposed to, at least in the concept? No, we've never heard of this before. Okay. So I ended up presenting this again to a packed room after hours as a bonus for financial advisors and attorneys and accountants, and went through all this stuff. And it ended up becoming something that a national document production company started to carry this trust. So this is a very specific trust designed for same-sex partners that gets around potential attacks on something called the gift tax. Basically, if it's a non-spouse and you're gifting to them, then you've got limits. Otherwise, you have to file gift tax returns. Well, this is a way that no matter what you had, if you combined it into a trust, you could reach these goals, but at the same time, document it in a way that avoided that gift tax. So, what are these three goals that ended up getting put into the development of this particular plan for domestic partners? Bring things together as one family unit. And this is what people just assume. Well, okay, if you're married, everything's joined, you're bringing everything together, we're acting as a family. Well, this is something that was being denied to my clients because they couldn't combine their assets without potentially tripping up the gift tax rules. So that was one big goal. They wanted everything to be at least controlled by each other, so that in the event of a crisis or just in day to day, they're allowed to act upon these assets, either one of them, to make sure that the family's moving forward. Okay. Second, they want to empower each other to act in a crisis or just in day to day. And so it's not, well, the law says if you become sick, then your next of kin steps in, and we're not going to define your partner as next of kin. Well, the solution to that is you've got each other named as trustees on your trust. You've naming each other in a financial power of attorney, naming each other in a healthcare power of attorney. But that overall goal is we want to empower each other to act. Third thing, they want the estate distribution to be in line with their goals, not what the government says the default is. The fact is, if you're married and you don't have any estate plan, at least in North Carolina, the spouse doesn't always get everything. If you're married, no kids, but your parents are still alive, yeah, the parents are getting half. Oh, that's not what we want. Well, that's why marriage doesn't work to give you exactly what you want. It's only the fill in that the state government said, and the state government said, well, we think that if you're married but you don't have kids, then the parents are entitled to something. We're going to give them half. Well, that's what the state decided, not what my clients decided. So this is why planning this all out makes much more sense. So those get three goals: bring things together as one family unit, empower each other to act, and have your chosen backups in the case of an emergency. And third, create an estate distribution that's in line with your wishes and goals, not the government's. So, what exactly can you do? This has to be a comprehensive plan that you can put together so that you're doing and reaching all of those goals as much as possible. The first thing is a revocable living trust, a joint revocable living trust, where the two of you are the trustors, you're the trustees, you're the first level beneficiaries, and then you decide how do things work when one person passes on. Now, that national company that I talked about, it's now it's the estate planning source, and they carry this trust in these trust packages. It's the Partner AB Secure Trust. I'm probably going to end up doing another professional video just being available to the professionals in that network. But again, if you're not in North Carolina, you can always call me. I can make some recommendations. But the company that's handling the national solution is the estate planning source, right? So that revocable living trust is set up so you can put everything in with those, uh, those parameters and reaching those goals. Again, empowering each other, bring together as one family unit, and have the estate distribution. But here's the important thing: to avoid that gift tax trap, what you're actually doing is it's going to have a cooperative domestic partnership property agreement. So everything's going into the trust, but this agreement that's incorporated and works with the trust lists out, okay, this person's putting this in. So even though we're giving control to the other partner, it's not a gift. We're wrapping this in as a control method. And so there isn't really anything that's going to trip up these gift tax rules and cause a filing to be done because the specific agreement says it's not a gift. It's just kind of a combination of property in a way to provide control. So that revocable living trust does a lot to reach all three of those goals. So what are the other documents that you need to have in line with this? Well, you also need to have, I call it a financial power of attorney. And again, I tick off a lot of it. Well, is it a durable general power of attorney? Is it a springing power of attorney? Is it a leaping frog power of attorney? Look, forget those technical terms. It's financial. It covers financial and legal aspects for another person. And this is an important thing. It's outside the confines of that revocable living trust. It's outside the partner AB secure trust. Do you put everything into a revocable trust as partners? No, because things like IRAs, 401ks, and other retirement accounts that are pre-tax money or even post-tax money, like Roth IRAs, you move it into your trust, it blows up its special tax status. So we're naming beneficiaries, and that may actually be the revocable trust. If you pass on, it goes into the trust. There may be other methods. I don't want to get too deeply into that. But the financial power of attorney, because it's outside the trust, is what can reach in and withdraw money, take out required distributions, use that money to take care of things in conjunction with money being in the trust to take care of things for you. Now, there's also a very, very important document. In fact, probably more important for same sex partners than other couples. It's that healthcare power of attorney. There were so many stories from more than a decade ago of partners just being kicked out of hospitals, being kicked out and taken away from making healthcare decisions because they didn't have a healthcare power of attorney. So, this may be something that we might end up having to address down the road because they're actually, under the Obama administration, there were some pretty strict rules that came into play that reinforced the power of a healthcare power of attorney, but you definitely need to have this as part of the overall package. So now, as partners, you can make decisions for each other and you can list the next people in line that you want. So we go a couple of layers deep, and really 3 layers deep. In, okay, you've got your partner first. Then you have this person. If they can't do it, we got another. If they can't do it, there's a third. That's kind of at a minimum. You can put more contingencies in, one person at a time, but it just makes sense to have that all laid out in a healthcare power of attorney. Because even if you just list your partner, but what if something happens to both of you? Do you want your next of kin to step in and handle healthcare decisions? You may not necessarily want that. You may have other trusted people. That's where you have to put it into the healthcare power of attorney. Now, there is another document that a lot of people consider personally important. It really doesn't have anything to do with empowering a partner. It's a living will. So this is where you're making your decision at that very last quote medical decision. If you're terminal and incurable, you're in a persistent vegetative state. That's North Carolina standard. Basically, the doctors are saying, well, there's nothing we can do. We don't think they're going to make it, but we can keep the body going on the machines and the nutrition and the hydration and hope for a miracle, leave them in a coma for years. And my clients are usually like, no, 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 no. If I have reached that point, take me off everything. A lot of my clients call it the pull the plug document. So you're making your decision ahead of time, so no one else really has to. So that's really an integral part of this overall plan as well. Another big document is a nomination of conservator. So here's where if anybody decides they want to challenge this, and it's a lot more likely that families will challenge stuff when you have a same sex partner as opposed to otherwise, you want to name the exact same people that you have in your other documents. Now, North Carolina is really good about this, other states, not so much, but you can list here's my conservator of the person, and those people in succession line up with your healthcare power of attorney. Here's my conservator of the estate. And now we're lining up those people in conjunction with the financial power of attorney and the trustee list. So it all lines up. So if it actually does get to court, there's a really strong argument that we don't need to have the court oversee this. And even if they do, you want the same people in line. So that's where that document comes into play. And then finally, yeah, there is a last will and testament. We call it a pour over will because it's supposed to just take odds and ends that end up in an estate, and yeah, they end up in probate and having to be supervised by a court. And at the end of the process, it pours it over into the trust. So the benefits of that is, well, look, not everything's going to end up in the trust. You can try everything you can. But if you have the absolute unmitigated nerve to die after you file your taxes, but before you get your refund, well, that check is in the name of the estate. You can't have it go to your trust. The federal government and the state government is only going to write out those refund checks to your estate, which means probate. Okay, the will is supposed to catch those things and move it in. It's not supposed to be a cure-all to not fund your trust. And if you want to check out more on that, we have a whole other paid course at trustfundingcourse.com. But I've also got a lot of free videos up on YouTube that talk about the importance of funding your revocable living trust. So those are the main documents. So let me just tell one more story about what happens if you do the planning the right way. I ended up, again, more than a decade and a half ago, getting a call, and it was the husband of a woman whose mom had died. And he wanted to know on his wife's behalf, well, look, the mom died. I can't get any information. And I'm like, well, if you contact the probate court, it's like, well, yeah, but there is another executor. They're not releasing any information. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Probate is a completely open and public thing. So anyone should be able to get information on what's in the estate. And I said, well, almost everything was in what's this thing? And you could tell he was reading a revocable living trust. And that woman that calls herself her partner is the executor and in charge of the trust. So they're not giving me any information. That's just not right. I'm like, well, look, anybody can put together a revocable living trust, put their assets into their trust, and it does keep it from having to be disclosed to the public. Well, it just ain't right. Well, okay, that may be your opinion. That may actually be the government's opinion in putting together the defaults in these irresponsibility laws, but it doesn't override that solid concept of trust in contract planning that we recommend for a lot of our clients. So he was out of luck, the daughter was out of luck, the partner apparently got control of everything.
All right. So now we've reached the point. What can you do if your same-sex partners, you're concerned about the potential, or it's already happened, the fall of Obergefell, and now suddenly same-sex marriages are illegal in your state, and maybe they're voiding all of these marriages that have already happened. Well, first, check out the materials at domesticpartnerplanning.com. I've got that domain set up. As I'm recording this, I'm just letting you know it's currently just going to freetrustcourse.com. It's the materials with my book, Estate Planning Basics, and some other items, and how do you get started? What's the best way to organize things? That's just a general thing on revocable living trust. It's not specific for domestic partner planning. I intend in the months down the road to update that, put together something very specific for domestic partners. But that does involve updating the book that I put together about more than 15 years ago, for current times, with the thought that probably Obergefell is going to be overruled and thrown out. So give me some time to get that. But in the meantime, you can get good, solid, basic information on what is a revocable living trust and how does that work. The other thing that's in that course and will be in the domestic partner planning course, it's a pre-appointment questionnaire that goes through, here's what I look for as an attorney before I get started. Our usual process is to have this pre-appointment questionnaire filled out before we actually sit down and meet and go through stuff. Even if you're not working with me, you're going to see the type of information that a lot of attorneys are looking for, so you can kind of get started getting organized there. And there's also some information in there on what our usual process is with my law firm, but also what are the 4 basic questions that we're probably going to be talking about and asking about. So go through those materials, but the most important thing is make sure you're getting an attorney who understands these types of concepts. Or again, with the estate planning source, they've got the documents. A lot of the attorneys that are in that network, they'll call me up and I'm going to give them that courtesy of giving them a little bit of overview. Plus, I'm probably going to be doing some very specific videos about the Partner AB Secure Trust and how it works for the network. So that's what you could do. Get a little bit of updated education on what these trust concepts are, because it's a whole new generation that you've enjoyed the benefit of same-sex marriage being completely legal, and it's probably going to go away. So make sure that you're doing everything you can. So, as I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day. And now, if this is part of a live component, especially for the estate planning source network, then we're just going to open it up for questions. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we are now at the question and answer point in the process. So please, if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat on YouTube. So this way we can make sure that we are addressing things. I know there is a little bit of a time lag. That's okay. But please go ahead and put in whatever questions you have so that we can address them directly. Just a little bit more of my personal background. I've done a lot of work in the LGBT community in the area in Raleigh. I was part of a group called Triangle Community Works and met a lot of great people there. It was essentially a programming nonprofit that would talk about issues related to same-sex partners, but just LGBT people in general, rights and whatnot. It really tried to be a resource for people. And then the LGBT Center of Raleigh kind of came into play, and we became the programming arm for the LGBT Center and just kind of folded into it. And then it was just all one group. So I continue to do a little bit of work with the LGBT Center of Raleigh, but then I also ended up doing some work with the Human Rights Campaign. So getting a little bit more on the political end. I was actually on the Board of Governors for several years and did a lot of work on that end. So, all right. So please go ahead and put questions in the chat if you have them. So I'm sure that people are wondering if the Supreme Court is going to take this up. How is it going to happen? When is it going to be overturned? Is it really going to be overturned? I'm kind of thinking, yeah, it will be, and it may be several years. And it's not because, oh, I'm just trying to sound the alarm. So, well, look, they overturned Roe v. Wade. What a lot of people don't realize about that particular decision is it's not just Roe v. Wade. It's all about how is that decision really put together. And it really came down to a kind of overriding theme of, look, some things are just not the government's issue. They should just leave people alone to make some of their own decisions. And that's where Roe, if it's falling under Roe v. Wade, there's a lot that went into, well, hey, look, if we've got these government benefits and whatnot, it's got to be equal. And a lot of those same underpinnings for Roe, you can probably see also in the Obergefell decision. And that's why it's like this Supreme Court seems to be a lot more in favor of, well, throw it down to the states, throw it down to the states, throw it down to the states, and let them decide, knowing that a big majority of the states are just going to say, well, no, we don't like these people, and therefore we're going to just throw out these particular rights. Why? Well, and the fact is, it's a lot more difficult to get people excited as political volunteers to try to get people elected to state legislatures and for a governorship, as opposed to the presidency and U.S. Senate. And so they know that this agenda is going to end up being a lot easier to get passed at the state level. All right. So I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. We'll give it just a couple of minutes. As I'm recording this particular live stream, we're about to get hit by some snow in the next day or two. And for our area, I heard it could be upwards of 5 or 6 inches of snow, which for people in the Northeast and some of those mountain states, that's nothing. It's quite a big deal over here because we really don't have any of the equipment to snow shovel. We don't have the plows like from when I was growing up in New England. Just some trucks to lay down salt and keep the main highways unfrozen. So we get 5 inches of snow on Wednesday early evening. Yeah, that's pretty much it through the weekend. So, all right. I am still not seeing anything in terms of questions in the chat. But like I said, I'm going to go ahead and also put in the free trust course, which will get you more information just in general on revocable living trusts and whatnot. The thing is, if we're going to have partners that are planning because we can no longer rely on marriage and we have to look at these issues of a domestic partnership property agreement, listing property separate to avoid getting tripped up with the gift tax. Again, the estate planning source is a good resource. They have the toolbox. They have the tools to do it. And it's just a matter of finding the right attorney who can help. So I guess we'll close it out at that. I don't want to keep people on if they've got other things to do. You can always follow up with more questions later on with me personally. So again, as I tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day.